come on the big show, the mortgage securitization mess still front and center. Floyd Norris of the New York Times saying this morning it's built on a foundation of sand. But if you look at recent data and some estimates from the banks, it might not be as bad as it seems. Are we the victims of our own anxieties? We have really yet to see the bottom fall out of the mortgage market. We're going to talk about whether or not that is still ahead.
Our headline of the day is the New York Times article, Some Sand in the Gears of Securitizing. Floyd Norris asking, was the great securitization machine that made hundreds of billions of dollars in mortgage loans based on a legal foundation of sand? Something to think about.
Certainly is. So if this is true, and we haven't yet seen the bottom fall out, then why are we hearing that certain banks are voluntarily getting back into the foreclosure game and that their exposure to mortgage debt is decreasing? Joining us now is Floyd Norris, New York Times chief financial correspondent, and Michael Moskowitz. He's the president of Equity Now, a direct mortgage lender since 1984. Nice to have you here, gentlemen. Welcome. Floyd,
thank you.
Let me start with you. You know, also, if you look at the bond market and some of the instruments that are tied to some of the instruments in the mortgage market, they haven't seemed to react the way one would think if indeed this mess is as bad as it is. And some of the banks are now getting back in. B of A is one of them, of course. Are we perhaps overstating the situation or not?
Well, there's no way to know how bad it is. The banks need to get back into the foreclosure business. That's what they're doing. They say they've solved some of their paperwork problems. The question that I raised today, which is raised by a couple of law professors and supported by some court decisions, is that the financial structure of the mortgage business in the securitization world was something called MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. They cut corners there. It is affidavits that stem largely from MERS that were at the heart of the first problems we've seen. And there are some court decisions that indicate conceivably these mortgages will not be enforceable. If that were the case, it would be a horror story for the banks.
Michael, do you think it's that bad as outlined by Floyd?
I agree. If there will be a problem with MERS, it will be a horror story. We happen to use MERS. We think MERS is a fine system. One needs to remember what happened before MERS. We used to wait 6 to 9 months to get assignments recorded, and I think the system cannot tolerate these mortgages being vitiated. So I think the lenders will prevail and the securitization will prevail. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of problems. You can't start inventing rights for every borrower. Some of these borrowers haven't paid for 3-4 years, and we're talking about property rights. You know, the people who gave the money also have property rights. What about them?
Floyd, in your article, you give a best outcome to this debacle and you give a worst outcome. Very quickly summarize them. Which do you think is the most likely outcome?
I don't know. Certainly the best outcome is the one that you just heard from the point of view of investors, which is that somehow all of this is okay. If MERS cut corners, the courts say, well, okay, after all, justice says these people did borrow the money. There's a couple of other outcomes, though. One is, one of the great advantages of MERS from Wall Street's point of view was it enabled them, when they transferred mortgages, to not pay new mortgage recording fees to local governments around the country. There's some reason to doubt that was done legally, and if this should arise, you can be sure those local governments will start seeking the money, and that could be a substantial problem for them.
Mr. Moskowitz, all these slurs against MERS make me wonder whether MERS actually owns the mortgage, or are they the agent and sort of a shell? What do you think?
I don't know. I certainly wouldn't call them a shell. I think MERS was invented to meet the problems of 5 years ago, and those were real problems. You had to wait 8-9 months to assign a mortgage. If you had to do anything with a mortgage, which I don't want to get into for time purposes, you had to wait for the local county clerk, who now, you know, according to Mr. Norris, might want his money. If we are a member of MERS, we can sign on to the system, we can see who owns the mortgage, we can see who it was assigned to. Transparency was discussed in the New York Times article. according to my attorney, who I've discussed this in detail with, there is no duty of transparency to the borrower. The only reason a mortgage is recorded is to put others on notice that there is a mortgage.
So very quickly, Michael, as we go forward, a lot of people are calling to change the system. How would you change the system? What one thing would you do?
I would say I would go more of substance over form, which is always good, and basically eliminate the technicalities of, in a foreclosure, having to say who's the owner of the mortgage. I would basically, whoever's foreclosing would have to say, I'm either representing or an agent for the owner, and I'm foreclosing as such, because that would take away, the only defense would be that somebody doesn't owe the money.
Right.
I mean, these technicalities aren't good for the system.
Thank you, gentlemen, both. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, you know him as the investing legend behind